welcome everyone to the November update of the Spotted Lanternfly in Massachusetts webinar series from the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. I am Jennifer Foreman-Orth. I will be the MC, so to speak, for today. We're very happy to welcome our guest speaker, Michela, who is an associate professor of viticulture at Pennsylvania State University. She's going to be speaking to you first today. We're going to change things up a little. And then when she is done, we're going to have an update from our Spotted Lanternfly survey team lead, Astra Perkins, about all the new finds that we've had in Massachusetts since we last had a webinar back in August. There's been a lot. And then Elizabeth Barnes, our forest pest outreach coordinator, is going to talk briefly to you about what you should be looking for in terms of scouting for spotted lanternfly at this time of year. So I am going to invite our speaker, Michela, to share your screen.
So thanks for having me. It's great to see so many people, over 300 people attending this webinar. So as Jen said, I'm a associate professor of viticulture. So I work with grapes, wine grapes, and I do research and extension. So I've been at Penn State since 2014. And actually it's when the lanternfly was first found in Pennsylvania, which is a coincidence, but basically I've been dealing with this pest for a long time, especially because it's such a concerning, invasive pest for vineyards. So briefly, what I'm going to cover today during the webinar, I'm going to first briefly touch base on the current distribution of lanternfly in the eastern United States. I know you already have, basic information about lanternfly, but mostly also I'm going to talk about the impacts, potential impacts that lanternfly had or is having to our industry, not just the wine industry, but also the general public and other industries. Then I'll talk also about some management option for grape growers based mostly on our experience with stakeholders in Pennsylvania. And I also briefly go over some of our research funding in vineyards, how the lanternfly is damaging crops, specifically grapes. So the presentation, I'll try to be concise. Hopefully it's not too long, and bear with me and my strong Italian accent. So first, we already know, I guess all of us know, that the lanternfly is an invasive pest from Asia and was native to some countries in Asia, but also has been an invasive pest in other Asian countries like South Korea and Japan. And I mentioned that because despite the lanternfly, has been classified as an invasive species before coming to the US, we really had zero information or very little information on how to manage this pest when it arrived to Pennsylvania, and even, how can damage agricultural crops and what crops. So really we had to start from zero, and, it was challenging because growers, farmers, and the general public, they had a lot of questions. What type of damage the lanternfly can cause, and also how to manage that. So, it was a steep learning curve over the last several years, probably 7-8 years. Also here you can see the map, an updated map of the current distribution of lanternfly in the eastern US. Probably you have seen this already. What I wanted to point out is basically that hopefully you can see my mouse, but down here, Southeast PA, that is where the lanternfly was first found in 2014. And it quickly spread, through the other counties in PA, but also is now present in 13 states, other states. So it's spreading very quickly despite our quarantine effort. And also I circled this area here in black, because that is where we had the most high infestation in the last several years. Since 2017, specifically in vineyards, we start to see lanternfly, and there is where we have the highest infestation density. And unfortunately, it's where also we have most of our vineyards. Most of our vineyards for wine grape production is in that area, here circle in black. So one of the reasons the lanternfly is such a successful invasive species is because it can feed on many, many different plants. The nymphs, really, they can feed on almost every crop. The adults, they tend to be a little more selective. They tend to prefer woody plants like trees, right? And grapevine. And but you can see here both nymphs and adult can feed on the tree of heaven and grapes. So those in yellow are basically the favorite hosts that, at least here in PA, based on our experience, we typically see them first on the tree of heaven, and then later in the season, they move to grapevines. And another challenge dealing with invasive species is that really the population can grow very, very quickly from 0 to huge level because there are no natural predators. And that is what we have been experiencing here in Pennsylvania, especially when we look at the favorite hosts, tree of heaven and grapevines. The picture here on the right show a trunk of the grapevines is completely covered, hopefully it's clear from the picture, by adult lanternflies. So this is a typical, situation we see on the edge of the vineyards, in vineyards with high number of lanternflies. And this is a video showing, again, huge amount of lanternfly, probably thousands of lanternfly on a single tree of heaven. And this is what we have seen mostly in Southeast PA, where we had the highest infestation density. So pretty scary videos. So one other challenge we experience dealing with lanternflies is that it's very hard to predict where the lanternfly are going to be from year to year, and also throughout the season. For example, we have vineyard in Southeast PA that had very bad infestations, maybe for 2 years in a row. But then on year 3, they didn't see any lanternflies. So, they thought they were done. The risk was passed and they were, okay. But then in year 4, they had high infestation again. So it's very hard to predict, what's going to happen in the following season. Also, we have growers that, have nymphs in their vineyard, and they're able to kill them, manage them through insecticide application, and then they think they're done for the season. They think they will be okay, and adults are not going to show up in their vineyard. And that also is another misconception, because often, or sometimes we see both, right? Nymphs, you manage the nymphs, but then the adults are coming back from the surrounding landscaping. So it's very unpredictable, again, also throughout the season. So in order to help stakeholders to track presence of lanternfly throughout the season and see, where it is and how bad the infestations are, we started this online tracking survey in 2023 around June. And basically what we did, we asked wine grape growers, vineyard owners, winery owners, but also farmers to report presence of lanternfly at their site. And so each of these red dots here in Pennsylvania, and also in other states, they represent a site where lanternfly was present during the season. And basically, and this map is available online. There is the link at the bottom of the slide. And if you click on one of the dots, basically you will have this information, this window pops up, and you can find, for example, the zip code and the name of the town. And you can see if the population of lanternfly increase or decrease, if the grower applied insecticide or not, and how bad was the infestation. Okay, and so we are kind of collecting all this information and see and have a better understanding about the spread and presence throughout Pennsylvania and also surrounding states. Also, I think we all agree that the lanternfly is a concerning pest, at least for the wine industry, but also for other industries, also for the general public. And based on our experience here in Pennsylvania, I try to divide, the problem with lanternfly into big categories, which of course also they overlap, but these are kind of the major problem we have when dealing with lanternfly. So I'll start by talking about the lanternfly being kind of a nuisance, as we call it, but not harming the vine or the plants through subfeeding. Okay. So one issue we, related to the lanternfly is the production of honeydew. as they feed on the grapevines or in other plants. So I don't know if you've ever seen this video. This video was made by one of the grad students working with lanternflies. This was back in 2017-18, showing a large number of lanternfly feeding on a grapevine. And hopefully you can see as the lanternfly are feeding, so they ingest a large amount of sap, they're also releasing the excess water and sugar through this honeydew. So you can see some up here on the top, and you can see more here from this lanternfly. Okay, so, and they release a lot of honeydew because they ingest a large amount of sap. So as they do that, you can see, the honeydew is going to build up around the feeding area of the lanternfly on the leaves. And the problem is that there is a fungus called sooty mold that can colonize the honeydew and creates this kind of black layer on the leaves. So this sooty mold does not harm the plants, okay? It's not like injuring the plants or reducing the health of the grapevines or other plants. But the problem could be that these black layers is going to stop photosynthesis, block carbon assimilation, and so could potentially damage the plants in an indirect way. But on a positive note, we never saw, at least in commercial vineyards, problem with sooty mold. We actually don't see much sooty mold growing on grapevines. In commercial production, okay, situation can be different in a backyard situation, a home grower growing grapevines in their backyard. And I'm saying that because our, grape growers, they spray fungicide, and we speculate that because they apply, fungicide throughout the season, they can kill the fungi growing, on the honeydew, can kill basically the sooty mold that doesn't really grow on the leaves. Okay, so on a positive note, we haven't seen issues related to sooty mold for commercial grapevine production. Could be different again for growers who grow a few vines in their backyard and they don't apply fungicides. Another concern about the production of honeydew and sooty mold was this black area created on the fruit because could potentially be an aesthetic, damage to the fruit, right? This is not actually a problem for wine grapes. Again, we don't see much sooty mold growing on the fruit because we apply fungicide, but it can be a different situation for table grape production, because in that case, really, the consumer doesn't want to see any black spot on the grapes, can be like a way to reject the product. So last, also the lanternfly are unfortunately considered a nuisance and annoying bug for people visiting tasting room, the outdoor business, because they want to sit outdoor, and in specific case of the winery, they want to sit outdoor and enjoy some wine, maybe with some live music, so they don't want to be bothered by these annoying bugs flying all over them they don't sting you, but, of course, they keep jumping on you and they're annoying. So we heard from winery owners, and these are two quotations, again, shared with us by Pennsylvania winery owner, saying that some of them received formal complaint or verbal complaints about the presence of lanternfly while they were outdoor enjoying, a glass of wine. But also on a positive note, what happens is that also people learn to accept them. If you are in an area where lanternfly, are present, they will be everywhere. They will be in your backyard. They will be, in a parking lot, everywhere. So people are kind of, after a while, they learn to accept them. And so, the situation is getting better, at least for us here in PA, where lanternfly has been present now for a while. I have another video here showing a patio area outside a winery by a vineyard. And this, again, was shared with one of our grape growers, a winery owner, showing that he had to apply insecticide to kill the lanternfly, not just the lanternfly in their vineyard, but also the one that were in the patio area around the tasting room. And that, of course, is labor, money, and also someone will need to clean up all this dead lanternfly before the customer come and sit on the patio and enjoy, the outdoor space. So, okay, this is not a direct damage to the plants, but still can create an economic burden to winery owner or to, owner of other outdoor businesses. And also want to mention that, especially, for you in other states where you don't have a population yet, and hopefully you won't experience what we have experienced here in PA over the last 7-8 years, that typically takes time to build up a population. So typically what we see, and just as an example, I want to talk about this vineyard here where we do our research. We didn't see lanternfly in this vineyard, natural population, for 2 years. They were actually present at the beginning in the wooded area. So in year 1, we found a few of them, tree of heaven or other trees around, in the landscaping around the vineyard. Then in year 2, we start to see a few of them, just a few on the edge of the vineyard. But in year 3, we actually start to see a lot of them, especially late in the season during harvest. And I don't know if you can see from this video, they're flying, above the vineyard, and while we were harvesting the grapes. So it's, it's annoying because you're there trying to work, harvesting, and they keep flying on you. And they're very active, especially when it's warm in the afternoon. So then I'll move to the second part where I'm talking more about the feeding damage caused to by the lanternfly to the plants. And this is a close, picture of an adult lanternfly feeding on a stem of the grapevine. So they typically feed on the stem, beginning of the season. Later on, maybe during harvest or after harvest, they move to the trunk of the vine, but they don't feed on the leaves. And you can see on this picture, like their mouth part here, feeding, tapping on the phloem on the plants. So basically, they can ingest, again, a large amount of sap that contains nutrients and sugar. So you can imagine when you have 100 of them on a plant, and they're pretty, big insect, they can ingest a large amount of sap and nutrients and sugars. So on a positive note, based on our reports from Pennsylvania tree fruit industry and, growers, the lanternfly doesn't seem to damage apple or other tree fruit. They can feed on, like you can see here, on apple trees, but typically in large number, but typically they don't stay on the apple trees for a long time. They just stay, maybe for a few hours, a day or two, and then they move to something else. So there is not, so far at least, economic impact of this pest on apple or stone fruit industry, at least here in PA. This is kind of outside my area of expertise, like nursery industry, but I want to share just a slide based on my colleagues' experience and research. There is no documented effect of lanternfly sap feeding on nursery plant. I mean, except for a few reports, there is no really irrelevant damage due to the sap feeding to nursery plants. However, the problem with the lanternfly is that even alive or dead insect or egg masses, they can be present, to products, nursery trees that are shipped, right, to other location or states. So that has been a problem because, the shipped products have been rejected because of presence of egg masses or dead insect in the shipment. So it's very hard, I don't know if it's clear from this picture, but it can be very hard to see the egg masses. They kind of blend very well with the trunks of the plants. It's a different story for vineyards. Definitely is a big concern for grape growers and for our grapes. They feed in a high number. They love grapes. When they find grapes, they're not leaving them. They stay there until you kill them with insecticides. And especially in the first few years, where really we had zero knowledge about the effect of lanternfly on the grapevines and how to manage them, we really, heard a lot of grape growers in the affected area complaining and reporting reduced fruit yield or the quality of the fruit, or even, vine death in extreme situation after heavy infestation. Like, when they have this type of infestation, like 100 or 50 on a vine, definitely they saw an effect. But of course, we didn't know, why and how. So just, to highlight that lanternfly is considered like an economic threat to our industry. I've just one slide showing results from a survey that we did back in 2022 with our ag economist to kind of better understand our industry awareness of lanternfly as a threat, if they perceive lanternfly as a threat for their vineyard and for the, for the state. And we also extend the survey to other states, as you can see on your left. And just, to simplify this slide on this graph, I want just to highlight that most of them agree or strongly agree that, that lanternfly is a significant threat for the industry. It's harder to define or to give a number, what's the economic impact of this pest on our industry. It's very complex. It doesn't only affect, the plants per se, but also can affect the winery business, like, tasting room, etc. We're trying now, we're in the process to do some case study where we interview growers and we ask, trying to have a better understanding of the economic impact, depending on the different case scenarios. Definitely the major, impact reported by grower is potential grape production if they're not promptly managed. And what is very well documented impact is the increase in management cost. Because unfortunately, the only way to control lanternfly population, at least in a commercial setting, is through chemical application, insecticides. And that, of course, is expensive and require labor, especially during a very busy time of the year, during or close to harvest. But also, on a positive note, we don't see typically lanternfly damaging vineyards across the whole vineyard block, right? Because most of them are concentrated on the edges, on the perimeter of the vineyards. And I'm talking mostly about adult lanternflies. So the adult lanternfly enter the vineyard or other orchards from the surrounding landscaping. And I want to give you as an example this vineyard here. So this is a vineyard, one of the first vineyard in Southeast PA that was affected by lanternfly, that had heavy infestation of adult lanternfly. And specifically this block here, vineyard block here, down here in blue, because that is where the grower found the highest infestation of lanternflies. So the insects were they were entering this vineyard here by this from this area, this wooded area, and they were mostly concentrated here in this corner. And hopefully it's clear from this picture, but here this is the area where most of the vines are missing. You can see some clear green areas, and because there are missing vines, as where the grower reported vine death due to lanternfly feeding. But other vines here, more like in the inside block, in the middle of the area where lanternfly, we have very few lanternfly, the vines were okay. Also, I wanted, probably you already know, I don't want to go over the life cycle of the lanternfly. We know they can have one generation per year from egg masses to adults. And I just want to highlight that we can find every life stage in vineyards, from egg masses to adults. Okay, so and actually research here at Penn State found that they complete their whole cycle on grapevines. They don't really need the tree of heaven. They do better if they have tree of heaven, but they don't need it to complete the cycle. So I want just to give you some example of egg masses that are found in vineyards and where, and also how the growers manage them. So egg masses can be found on trunks of the vines, on vineyard posts, like wooded post, metal post, and sometimes you find a lot of them, like here on a single post. So at the beginning, during the first years where growers had egg masses, back probably in 2017, 18, what they did, they were, started to scrap them, to mechanically remove the egg masses throughout the winter as they were pruning the vines. But then they found out that it's very, very labor intensive. Of course, this is feasible. It's okay, works if you have a very small vineyard, if you have a few vines. But when you have acres of grapevines, it's very, very hard, very time consuming. So they gave up on that. Also, there have been some chemical product herbicides that have been tested with variable results. I mean, they don't, some, work better than other. And here, I would say kill up to the highest, success, or the higher efficacy is about 70–75%. But our grape growers actually don't usually treat egg masses, don't usually use herbicides to kill egg masses. What they do, they typically wait until the egg masses hatch and they have nymphs in the vineyard. At that point, they're going to take action and apply chemical to control the nymphs population. And one of the reasons is because of a few of the reasons. One is also it's very hard sometimes to see the egg masses, and they can be, hidden inside the trunk of the vine. So it's very hard to reach that with the insecticide, with the chemical product. And also sometimes, at least in our, here in PA, most vineyards are surrounded by trees. And sometimes there are tons of egg masses around the vineyard. So even if you kill the egg masses, or treat the egg masses in your vineyard, the nymphs can come, from the surrounding landscaping. Nymphs are typically present in vineyard from like early spring, depending on the temperature, can be mid and April or May, and they can stay in the vineyard until the fourth instar, typically until the end of July. You can find them on the bottom, of the leaves. They like to hide under the leaves or on the stems. This is where we typically see them. Nymphs, I mean, our grape growers are not particularly concerned about nymphs and treating them or the damage they can cause to the vines. So what they typically do, most of them, at least most of them, they do what we call a cover spray. So they wait until they have to treat for other insect pests, that in our case are grapeberry moth or Japanese beetles. And at that time, so they do one chemical application, one insecticide that control all of those insects. And on a positive note, once the nymphs are killed, they're not coming back. They don't reinfest the vineyards as the adults do. So, okay, so this is a minor concern for growers. But adults, that is a different story. Adult lanternfly can be found again in very high number in vineyard late in the season, and they're very difficult or more difficult to manage. So they typically show up, I would say they start to show up in August, but we reach a peak population typically in September, and they can stay in the vineyard until the end of the season, until, the fall frosts are going to kill them. So why it's challenging? One of the challenges, typically the lanternfly are there very close to harvest or during harvest when the growers have to harvest the crop. So, of course, you don't want to, you can't, and you don't want to use insecticide that they can harm, the workers or can have residual activity or residual in the fruit. So there are only a few insecticides that can be used, and most of them are contact insecticide. So they work well, but the problem is that the lanternfly, after a few days, typically they come back. There is a new population entering the vineyard, and then the grower has to apply insecticide again because they can only use contact chemicals. So that definitely creates this, increase in insecticide, of course, create a lot of financial concerns. Also it's a very busy time of the year. It's hard to find the time to spray, but also there are environmental concerns related to, increased use of insecticide that can kill beneficial insect, and so we have increase of secondary pests in vineyards. So here are a few notes, based on our experience working with grape growers and our, what they share with us. Definitely, I would say at this point, all of the growers that have adult lanternfly in their vineyard use insecticide to kill the pest. Some of them, of course, trying to be more environmentally, friendly and maybe only spray some area of the vineyard where lanternfly is present in high number, like the vineyard edges. So they don't, always spray the whole vineyard block, but only the edges where most of the lanternfly are. Or some of them also, they spray the areas around the vineyards to avoid, the lanternfly from entering the vineyard. So again, I want to mention that at least in a commercial setting, the only way to keep population down under control at this point are through chemical applications. We have a Penn State, we have an extension fact sheet is available online, and there is also a PDF version where we cover, for each life stage, different option to manage from, chemical control to more like other way to control or to biological control this insect. And here I'm not going to go through this huge table. I just want to highlight that in that fact sheet, so you can find a list of insecticide that can be used to control lanternfly based on some trials that have been done here in Pennsylvania. So again, lanternfly are easy to kill. The problem is they then reinfest the vineyards after a few days that chemical application has been done. So now I'm moving to go over some of our research finding on how lanternfly can damage the plants. And I hope it was clear through this first long part of the presentation that unfortunately lanternfly has kind of disturbed our IPM management strategies, right? I mean, it's very hard to use integrated pest management practices when you're dealing with these new invasive pests. So our research, or part of our research, focus on kind of better understand the damage in hope, right, that we can help growers to have more target management practices. I'm saying that because right now, grape growers, sometimes spray when they see just a 2 lanternfly on a vine. And we say, well, maybe you should wait and see if your population goes up, because we don't know at this point what's the lowest population density or level that can create an economic damage. Definitely, I mean, hopefully it's not 1 or 2 per vine, right? It's more than that. So basically our research focus on understanding if the grapevine actually can withstand a certain population density without having any negative effect on, on the health of the vine, but also on the wine. Because we work with wine grapes, so of course it's important to produce good and high quality wine. So we conducted now since 2019 several research trials. Most of them are at vineyards, so field-grown grapevines, and we use several important grapevine variety for Pennsylvania. So what we did for each of these trials, basically we enclose grapevine. So this is, each vine basically gets their own cage, netting cage, and we introduce lanternflies inside those cages. So each vine is exposed to lanternfly, to a different number of lanternfly. We go from 0 to very high number, again, because we want to understand the response of the vines to different population level. Probably these numbers here, they don't tell you much, but just to give you an idea, the range we're working on are from 0 to something like 200 lanternfly per vine. So we go to extreme. So most of our work so far is focused on adult lanternfly, because again, this is the most concerning stage for grape growers. And we look at how lanternfly, this adult lanternfly, can damage the vine after one season. Then our work expanded to other variety, but also to the nymphs. So we are also looking at how nymphs, if and how, can damage the vines, not only the adults. And also we are looking what happened when lanternfly are coming back to the same vineyards year after year. Is there like a cumulative effect on to these continuous infestations? So again, you can see some other vineyards with cage vines and other varieties. So this slide here kind of summarize our more consistent results. What we have seen, consistent trends across all these trials over the years and different grape variety. So definitely we see that this adult lanternfly, if they're let to feed on the vine, if we don't promptly manage them, they really can cause a damage on the carbon allocation throughout the season, at the end of the season. And mostly I'm referring here to starch. So starch is a sugar, is a carbohydrate that is very important for the plants for surviving like the winter and also for growing in the next season. So the plants need starch to overwinter and to grow in the following spring. And if there is a strong decrease, the vine maybe is not able to grow in the following spring or not grow as well. But also we see a decrease in the sugar in the grape at harvest. And again, that can be a concern because, of course, we need, enough sugar in able to produce good wine. And again, I don't want to show, lots of data and complicated tables and graphs. I just want to give you an example on the strong effect that those insect, this pest has on, for example, the sugar accumulated in the grapevine roots over just 1 year of infestation. So these dots, okay, each dot basically is a grapevine, which was exposed to a different number or level of lanternfly, from 0 to very, very high number. So basically, this graph shows us that there is really a linear trend: more lanternfly, less starch on the roots. And when you have a fewer lanternfly, there is not much of an effect. But when you start to have a high population, unfortunately, there is. And these numbers are very, very low. And this could potentially explain why, growers have seen a vine decline, especially in the year after the infestation, in year 2. Okay. And then also, growers always ask us, can lanternfly decrease yield, the amount of fruit produced on the vines? So what we found so far that typically the lanternfly, will infest the vines late in the season. So on the first year, we don't typically see a reduction in yield. And this is what this graph here is showing you. Basically, there are all these random, dots, scatter plots. So basically show that vines with 0 lanternfly or with a high number, they can have similar fruit, similar amount of fruit. But then the following year, the second year, because of the stress on the root starch and because we infested them again with lanternfly, we definitely see a reduction in yield. Again, this is why the grower really need to promptly manage the grapevine, because if you let them feed on the vines, they could potentially see a reduction in their grape production. Okay, this is a vine with a high number, so only produce 1 kilo of fruit, compared to vines with no lanternfly, they produce 6, 7, almost 7 kilo of fruit. And last, I also wanted to show you, that the lanternfly unfortunately can affect the amount of sugar accumulated in the grapes, in the fruit. Again, they ingest a large amount of sap, and and this is why also we see less sugar accumulated in the fruit. So this is another graph. It's still the same. You have vines with no lanternfly and vines with increasing number of lanternfly. This is the day we release lanternfly on those vines. So we were not expecting an effect, right? And this It's called Brix, is our index to measure sugar accumulation. So there is no effect. But then the lanternfly, after the lanternfly fed for 11 days on the grapevine, we collected the grapes and we start to see an effect, like more lanternfly, you start to see a reduction in the Brix, so in the sugar level. But if the lanternfly keep feeding on the vine, so this is another 15 days. 15 days later, we got another, grape sample, and we definitely saw a sharp decrease in Brix. We typically want, 21 Brix at harvest, but you can see the vines with lanternfly have a lower amount of sugar. Okay. And we see this a similar trend across, not just in this variety in this year, but across several varieties. And I also want to give, a visual aid to kind of, see how grapes, can be different, can look different harvest when you have a vine with no lanternfly and fruit, on a vine that has been exposed to 200 lanternfly, huge amount of lanternfly. But you can see these grapes are supposed to be, this nice dark color. Actually, some of the cluster have this pale color, they're not ripening, and this definitely can affect the color also of the wine, especially for a red wine. So briefly, what we found throughout these 5 years, of our field research, that definitely lanternfly, if it's not promptly managed, can slowly, progressively reduce the amount of sugar and nutrients accumulated in the vines. And this can explain why, the growers have seen this negative effect, this vine decline over the years. In our studies, this depends on the age of the vine, depends on, the health status of the vines. But overall, we saw the worst effect when we had something like 80 lanternfly per vines. Okay, the vines were able to withstand small population density. But I guess this also depends on other factors. So, okay, to summarize some of the key points, we see now the lanternfly as a stressor, right? Another stress the plants have to deal with, together with other environmental stress, with other pests. So definitely, what we suggest, recommend to our grape growers is to keep the vine, healthy, like humans, right? It's the same concept, because they will be more, it will be more easier for them to overcome this additional stress, which is not always easy, but of course, they can do their best vineyard management practices to keep the vine in balance and in good shape. Of course, we also suggest them to scout the area around the vineyard for presence of nymphs and then adults, and to develop an action plans. And most importantly, to reduce the feeding time by the adults. Because as we see from our research, if you don't promptly manage them, if you let them feed on the vines for like 2 weeks, like over the season, you can start to see some relevant effect, negative effect. I just want to mention one slide for in case there are some grape growers or people in the audience that have maybe a small vineyard, a few vines, because one potential way to manage the lanternfly that we have been testing, which probably is not feasible, again, when you have lots of grapevine, a huge acreage, is to use this exclusion netting. Basically, you put this kind of hell netting around the vine and tie them to the ground. And we found it really works well to keep the lanternfly out of your vines. And also we found that doesn't not really have effect on the fruit ripening parameter, or does not increase the disease level of the vine. So this is just a few pictures of us, our team deploying this exclusion netting. Again, this may not be feasible if you have like acres and acres of grapes, but could potentially be an option for small size vineyard business. And with this, I'm done. Thanks so much for listening to this long webinar. And And of course, I just leave the slide here because I want to definitely acknowledge all the people, some at least the people that were part of this. It's really a team effort dealing with these pests. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I believe you did agree you could stick around until the end of the webinar to answer questions. Is that still true?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to quickly introduce Astra again. She is our spotted lanternfly survey team lead, and she is going to talk to you briefly about all the new finds that we've had of spotted lanternfly this season.
Okay, I apologize because I have a lot of slides here. I will try to go through them quickly. So I'm just going to give you the fall update for our survey for SLF. As a recap from the last webinar in August, at that time we had 4 known populations. The first one was in Fitchburg, and we found one in Shrewsbury, and then in Springfield, and then in Worcester. So that's what the map looked like as of August. And these are what the infestations looked like at the end of our seasons last year. So at the end of the live season, which is about now last year. Just for reference, each of these squares is a 1 kilometer squared grid. And then all of these red points are trees that we found SLF on. So you can see Springfield, there's about a 1/4 kilometer. Worcester is bigger at over 1 kilometer. And then the Shrewsbury one's a little blown out of proportion, but you can see it's just sort of little spots within one of the kilometer grids. So as of right now, this is what Worcester and Shrewsbury look like. All these smaller red circles are the old points, and the triangles are the new points. So as you can see, it's spread quite a bit, and Shrewsbury and Worcester are sort of marching towards each other. And then in Springfield, we just had this little 1/4 mile area, and now they've spread quite a bit farther out. And then Fitchburg, thankfully, appears relatively unchanged. There was one main parcel where we originally found them that we did tree removal and herbicide treatments. And the company that owns that building has actually been doing herbicide treatments on the removed trees for themselves for a while. But the SLF has really only moved to like one other parcel. And then there's this outlying point here. That was just one individual. And so we're not too worried about that right now. I'll just quickly go over what our survey looked like. In the early spring, we installed these bug barrier traps in anticipation of hatch. They're good for catching nymphs, which just due to their movement up and down the trees, they'll get stuck on the interior of the thicky band. So it helps to give us an idea of how many are in a given area in the early season, and just to mitigate some of the population. So in Springfield and Worcester, we had 30+ traps throughout the infestations, and Shrewsbury and Fitchburg had some in their heaviest areas, just to give us kind of an idea of what was going on in there. So then over the summer, we switched them out to these circle traps. This is a bag full of dead SLF on one of those traps in Springfield. And we also began our survey outside the established edges of the infestations to see if the insects had migrated. So that was those maps that I showed you earlier of the infestations. We started with all of those and just kind of moved from where we had last seen them outward. And then this fall, we continued to try to delimit known infestations, and we monitored the traps continuously. Responded to the reports that we get of SLF throughout the Commonwealth. And then we had contractors perform several treatments with bifenthrin in the heavier areas of Springfield and Worcester. So now to the juicy part. So as of our August webinar, we had received quite a few public reports, but none had uncovered a new infestation. Lots of times you'll get hitchhikers in from other states, etc. But right after our webinar in August, things started to change. And in very late August, we received a report from Holyoke, which uncovered a new infestation. So this is what that looks like. Again, these lines, the grids are kilometers squared. So this is kind of overlapping several, but you can see it's not huge. We think this is relatively delimited as of right now. So that's what it kind of looks like. But as soon as we got to a parking area where nearby the report, we immediately found SLF on that property. So, you know, these reports really help us to actually find where this is in the state. But right after Holyoke, we heard from Agawam. Someone who worked somewhere said they had seen several, and that report didn't include a picture, but it seemed to be a high-risk area based on what the company was. There's heavy transportation in the area, and it's right near some highways and off-ramps, etc. So we went out, talked to the employees. They immediately pointed us to a particular corner of their property where we found at least 100 SLF on one tree, and then continued to find several points around that area. Again, you can see this is a kilometer square, so it's not a huge area right now. Again, we think it's relatively delimited, although in this population, when we went back after the swarm, which happens in like late September, we couldn't find as many in the original spots, so they've probably migrated kind of all around this area. After that, we heard from Southborough. The report came from a business along one of the main roads. Didn't see anything actually at that business, but across the street, we found a couple trees with several SLF on them. And then as we continued our survey, we found a hot tree, which is this tree right here, which had, you know, probably several hundred on it. And then there's a few abutting parcels to that where they've spread from there, or there were other SLF or egg masses. And so right now there's like sort of a little pocket, and then there's some outlying points all along the main highway there, which is not surprising. So that's what it looks like as of right now that we know of. And then in late September, we heard from Weston. And we had actually gotten a report from Weston late last year or early this year of some SLF on Atlantis. And it just said a trail behind the houses. So we kind of had to figure out what that meant. We found a trail, but didn't see any Atlantis. And the picture was quite obviously SLF on Atlantis. So it was sort of a mystery until we got this next report, which was it was close by, but not necessarily right there. And so surveyors went out to recheck the area that we had heard about and found adults, egg masses, and sooty mold. Michela mentioned earlier sooty mold. Here's a really great example of some knot we had just covered in it. This was underneath like the main tree that we found, but there weren't that many SLF on the tree when we found it, so clearly there had been more at one point and they'd migrated off. But the area is really residential. It seems kind of small so far, but on a hunch, we went over to a different trail that we had checked in the winter where we knew there were Atlantis, and we found just a few more. So that population isn't huge, but it just happens to be right over the Wellesley town and the Norfolk County line, which is this yellow line going through the map here. And then after that, we got a report from Chelmsford. So that was in late October. The report came from a heavy equipment place, and someone said that they had killed multiple SLF. Here's the picture that they sent us. It's a kind of a spotty population. There's not like super heavy points anywhere, so it's possible that there was a couple egg masses last year that hatched. and they've since swarmed and moved on to other points, but it's near very busy highways and off-ramps. Not particularly super industrial or anything, but it's right near the highway. And Chelmsford is pretty far north and a good access point to other states, so we're keeping an eye on that. We'll continue to limit, but so far this is what it looks like. And I don't have any of the negative points on this map, but there's a large swath of negative points all around where these red ones are. So right now it seems pretty contained. And then we had a report right after that from Ashland. It didn't have a picture and it wasn't super concerning, but the reporter thought that they had picked it up on state land. So the USDA went out to survey. They didn't see any on their state land, but they found like a super small pocket nearby, like 8 to 10 individual adults. So it's pretty unlikely that that's where the reporter picked up the SLF due to the size of that population. So we'll be scouting their home city more to see if there's any there. But you can see this is just like, there's a few points here, and then this was one individual found somewhere else. Unfortunately, at this point, we've had years of people bringing SLF with them without realizing it. So there's probably 1 or 2 individuals every season in a lot of places just from people bringing them up on their vehicles. It's unfortunately just how this is going to happen. So this is what it looks like now. We've got 10 infestations versus the 4 we talked about in August. They are relatively small, most of these new ones that we've seen. So hopefully we can do some real mitigation with our treatments this winter and next spring. But the takeaways are that SLF spreads really easily. So if you're already in a known infestation, check your vehicle before kind of leaving that area. If you're on a road trip through the infested states, maybe go through a couple of car washes on your way up, check your luggage, check yourself. They're pretty innocuous. You might have one on you without even noticing. They don't move around a ton. But MDAR and USDA will be doing egg mass scraping all winter to try to keep the population size relatively static in the densely populated areas and the larger infestations. And then hopefully we can make a dent in those smaller low density areas and keep that population small. And then next year, we're gonna switch to some systemic treatments earlier to try to catch the SLF before they swarm, because they do move off of what they hatched on and feed on as nymphs after they breed. They just sort of take off in all directions as adults.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth for some final slides before we move on to the Q&A.
I'll be real quick about this. If you see a spotted lanternfly at this time of year, please do send in a report. If you can get a picture, that's really helpful, but you don't have to. Here are some examples of the egg masses. That's what you're probably going to be most likely to see around this time of year, potentially a dead adult, although it does seem like those are dying off at this point for most of the state. If you are unsure, please do still send in a report. We want those. Even if you're a little bit on the fence if it's a lanternfly or not. And then finally, I always like to remind people, if you see something you think is a little bit weird, but you don't necessarily think it's an invasive species, please do ask someone about that. That's how we find out about a lot of new invasive insects that we didn't even know were in the country. So if you're asking someone, that could be us, that could be your friend who's really, really into insects, whoever it is, just ask someone to double check. It's better to be safe than sorry. All right, now we do have a bunch of resources. You can download those off of our website, or if you are in Massachusetts, either living or working, and you have somewhere around here to distribute materials, you can order those from us for free. We are happy to send them to you. Those are lanternfly materials, as well as other insects like Asian longhorn beetle. Finally, we have a newsletter, comes about once a month. It's 5 bullet points or less of timely forest pest information with links out to further reading if you want to know a few more details. You can sign up here using this QR code or the link on the screen, and we'll also put a link to that in the chat. And with that, I did say I would be quick. If you have any questions about spotted lanternfly or any other invasive insects, please do feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information on the screen now. And now I think we can transition over into questions.
Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to move on to the question and answer portion of the webinar. Just a couple of questions I'm going to answer right off the bat because I saw them come in. There's a direct link to that map that Astra had up from our online pest dashboard in the chat so that you can go there yourself and explore it further. But just so that you know, the orange on the map is actual established infestations of spotted lanternfly, and the blues are places where somebody identified a lanternfly, but the survey team couldn't find any actual infestation, so it just appeared to be like a hitchhiker of some kind. So let's see. All right, this one is actually for Michela. Well, I think it's for Michela. We'll see. If the vineyard is organic and lanternfly is present, if they do a treatment afterwards, can they still be registered as organic?
Oh,
Maybe a better question is, are there lanternfly treatments that are labeled organic?
Okay, yeah, no, that's first, it's a very good question, and I know it's a big concern. It's a big concern for organic producers, right? Because all the options I listed are, chemicals that you can't use in organic production. The only product that can be used and was in some type of insecticidal soaps, but their results are mixed. I mean, they don't work as well as, unfortunately, as the other insecticides. So unfortunately, we don't have any great options for organic grape producers at this point. One option, is to net the vines, the exclusion netting, so to avoid the feeding, but that I know is very also labor intensive. I think, as the lanternfly is moving to areas where there is more organic production of grapes, they will look into that more. But to date, unfortunately, there are no, great options. You can try the soaps, but they work so and so. Hope I answered the question, yes.
I think that's good. Somebody had there were a couple of folks that were both asking about the impact on native grape species. And before I turn it over to the panel to answer that, I do want to mention that our August webinar touched on this topic with our guest speaker, Tracy Lesky. So I am going to put a link to our YouTube channel in the chat in case you want to check it out in detail. There were definitely impacts seen on native grape species that we have in Massachusetts, but I don't know if Michela wanted to take that or possibly Elizabeth, but either way, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we also, based on the research, it's been done here on mostly Concord, our big native grapes. They do also feed on Concord. Maybe they do better on our, wine grapes, like we call European varieties, but they can feed on both of them. Or other native wild grapes, yes.
Yes, I think it was Vitis riparia that saw some significant impacts as well. And I know that's a fairly common species in Massachusetts. All right, let's see. There were a couple of those predator questions coming in. I know we've talked about it in the past, and I know that there are folks, I think in Pennsylvania, doing studies on whether there's any like natural controls out there. I'm going to say that I think that we still haven't found any evidence that any predators are having a negative impact on lanternfly populations at this time. Correct me, panelists, if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there are some general predators that can, feed on the lanternflies, like wasps, praying mantis, and the wheel bugs. But at this point, is not enough, right, to control population, at least here for us in Pennsylvania. Maybe, you know, with time, things will change. Yes.
We don't, for now, we don't have wheel bugs in Massachusetts. I know they don't get quite that far north, but I'm hoping it stays that way. But Astor, there is a question about treatment. So someone was saying, is there like a recommendation for treating for the general public in towns that have lanternfly like Weston and Wellesley, and are there treatments necessary yet? I feel like that's a good question for you to answer, Astra.
I would talk to a local tree company. We have management guides out for homeowners, and UMass has good management guides out. There's a couple chemicals that can be used by certified applicators, but not by the general public. Those small infestations, you know, we're gonna try to do egg mass scraping to keep them kind of contained. They're not huge yet. But unfortunately, a lot of times these things also occur in wetlands because that's where Tree of Heaven is. And there's not really much you can do as far as like chemical treatments in those areas. So there's, I think not a lot of town can do unless you want to put a lot of resources to it. But you can look at those management guides.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I put a link to our Massachusetts homeowners management guide in the chat. Earlier, I put in the incredibly useful Penn State University Spotted Lanternfly Management Guide, which is very comprehensive, and we borrowed heavily from it for our own management guide. Somebody did ask about management recommendation for controlling Ailanthus. I still feel like I want to go to you, Astor, for your opinion on that, but other folks can also jump in.
Not cost effective. If you happen to have like one Ailanthus on your property or something and you want to remove that, you can try it, but you'll have to apply herbicide pretty much yearly to keep that from growing more shoots, and the shoots are going to be even more attractive to any SLF in the area. There's easier to feed from, especially for the nymphs. So it's just not really worth it. They don't need Tree of Heaven, so you know there's plenty of maple in Massachusetts. They can use that. There's plenty of wild grape, so it's not necessarily worth it or cost effective to try to remove all the Ailanthus in an area.
I think I'm in agreement on that. Someone asked if there are any known negative effects on highbush blueberry. Anybody want to field that?
No, that we know.
Okay.
Maybe it's not widely grown in PA, but there is no reported effect on blueberry.
Okay. And someone else asked if there's been any sort of implementation or success with the use of growth regulators alongside pesticide applications. That is not something a topic I'm familiar with. Michela, is that something you're familiar with?
No, I mean, like I mean, I don't know what type of growth regulators, but also that can change the way the grapevine grows. Like can be dangerous.
Insect growth regulators.
Okay. No, but
not that we're familiar with,
no.
I would say. Okay. All right, it's at 11:24. I think I'm going to just take one or two more questions and then we're going to have to end it. Someone asked about sightings in Rhode Island. There have been there's an established infestation in Rhode Island. I'm going to ask Elizabeth to put that link in the chat now. Thank you. Someone was asking where lanternfly came from. I mean, we know that it was first found in Pennsylvania at a company that distributes crushed stone and had received imported stone from Asia. California is incredible. They asked also sort of about the wine industry in California. I mean, California is incredibly concerned about lanternfly and has recently instituted additional checks for any nursery materials that are being shipped to their state from other states that have lanternfly. So they require us to have inspectors certify that things are lanternfly free before we ship them. All right, I think I could take one more. I don't know which one to take. Hold on. Lots of good questions. Everybody, thank you so much for your participation. Let me pick one great last question. Well, I'll take this one quickly. Somebody was asking basically about a parasite, predator, or pathogen. That is a mouthful to provide lanternfly control. The USDA is currently doing research on biological controls. It's still very much in the research and the lab phase, but they are attempting to work on it. There's also been some investigation into the pathogen Bovaria bassiana and its ability to, it's been observed to be attacking lanternfly out in the wild, but Bovaria is a generalist pathogen, so it remains to be seen whether it can be harnessed to have a negative impact on lanternfly without negatively impacting native species. Okay, I'm going to take this one as the last question. Somebody asked, how cold tolerant is spotted lanternfly? Can they overwinter in northern climates? And maybe somebody's asking that. I mean, we obviously know that, so they're overwintering in the egg mass stage, and the egg masses have had no issue overwintering in Massachusetts. Does anybody want to speak to their ability to go further north? I have my opinions, but somebody else from the panel wants to weigh in.
I think it would have to be like incredibly cold for a really long time for them to not be able to hatch in the spring. And I know there's some studies on temperature tolerance. And I think that tolerance was pretty high for a lot of variation in the climate. Yes. So they likely can survive pretty far north in the US.
Yes.
Further north than us, right?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I just want to, because we were surprised, like despite the polar vortex, we had 2014, the following winter was very cold. They still survived. Maybe, maybe a lower number, but that didn't stop them. So, yeah.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if Elizabeth was going to add anything.
I was just going to add that the studies that I have seen have suggested that they're more likely to be affected by really hot temperatures than really cold temperatures. And then also, if we got like spikes where it was warm enough for them, like early in the spring, if it was warm enough for them to hatch and then it got really cold, like after the nymphs had been out, that might be more of an issue. But everything suggests the egg masses are extremely cold tolerant, unfortunately. Just to agree with what everyone else has said.
Thank you. I lied. I'm going to take one more question because I feel like this would be a good one to have Michela answer. When would you cover plants if you have eggs hatching on them and nymphs present? I assume this would be preventative before any are seen. I assume this is in reference to the screening that you showed in your talk of the grapevines.
Yes, sorry. If the covering of the plants, the netting, can help with the egg masses and nymphs. Did I understand the question?
I think so. Let's just go with it. At this point, we'll just go with it.
Okay, let's go with it. Again, the short answer is no. I mean, yes, definitely prevent egg masses for forming on those vines, right? But, you can have still nymphs coming from the surrounding area. So, I mean, depends, right, on your vineyard, where you are. But even growers that remove all the egg masses, then they had nymphs in some situation in their vineyard. So definitely can help preventing from, egg masses on trunks, on cordons of the vines that are, covered. But they can be on the posts, right? On the wires, everywhere. I mean, so it's hard to really control them 100%.
Is that netting meant to be exclusion, like complete exclusion?
Complete exclusion for the mostly for the adults. So we put them on like August, when we start to see them around, and cover the whole canopy and and to the ground. So you need to staple them on the ground, secure them to the ground. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. I think that is a good place to end. Thank you thank you to everybody who stuck it out until the very end. Got about 150 people left here. Thank you so much to our panelists, Michela and Astra, for participating today. And Elizabeth for helping out with all of the questions and answers and for really effective presentations as usual. For folks who are looking for pesticide credits, just a reminder, we'll have those processed within the next month or so. We invite you to register for our February webinar. If you are interested, I'm going to quickly pop a link into the chat, but also you'll receive an email with an invitation for that when everything is set up. And once again, I just want to thank our audience and our panelists for being here today. And I think we're all set. So I'm going to end the webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.